The moderator for this panel, Adam Goldberg, who is the executive architect for the Financial Innovation and Transformation Office at the Department of the Treasury.
But I want to think about this panel session now as a kind of a bookend to your day. So this morning we have these four panelists, each representing one of the major functional domains, management domains in our agencies. At the end of the day, we have their OMB counterparts who are also representing those same functional domains. And what should be evident to you as we go through the day is what are the things that these folks are saying, what are the things that you're learning through the middle sessions where it talks about other issues in more detail, and then how is OMB bookending to the day? And are we on a consistent message here? Are we looking at the same types of things? So when we talk about what does it take to be a shared service provider, or is it worth it to go to shared services, what are the answers that we're hearing throughout the day? And really, as we go through this discussion now with these folks, this might help determine really what session you're looking to go to next. So if you're looking to what does it take to be a provider, we're going to ask these folks a little bit about what do you think it means to be a good provider, or to David, what are you hearing about your good providers? Shared services, is it worth it? We have folks up here that are having experiences with shared services today and looking at shared services. So what are they taking away from that? And is that something that you're interested in? And then the acquisition process itself. There's a lot of different things you have to do when you buy a shared service from a public sector organization than when you buy it from a private sector organization. Is there anything that we need to know? Do we need to do better as we go through that journey of shared services? So what I'm going to do first is just give you by name the four panelists that we have up here today. So first, to my left, we have Peggy Sherry. Peggy is the Chief Financial Officer of the Department of Homeland Security. Next to Peggy is David Vargas. He's the Director for Human Resources, IT Transformation, Office of Personnel Management. This is really your HRLB group. Then next to David is Ann Rung. She's the Associate Administrator for the Office of Government-Wide Policy at GSA. And then lastly is Dr. Simone Szykman, the CIO at Department of Commerce, also U of R grad. Go Yellow Jackets. And what I'd like to do first is actually turn it to Peggy, for her to share a little bit about herself and also the experiences she has and is having with shared services.
Great. Good morning, everyone, and thank you. I'm very glad to be here, and I'm very much looking forward to hear what my colleagues have to say, and just in general, what type of questions, what's kind of went on your mind. With my 5 minutes here, I thought I would just do a couple things here if I could. Tell you just a little bit about myself, but I also wanted to really kind of tell you a little bit about DHS and why we're really a very good example of an agency that could use shared services. Also talk a little bit about what some of those barriers have been to getting into shared services, and then really what some of the opportunities are. So I've been with DHS, as Adam said, we've known each other for quite some time. We've had lots of conversations in the past in his various roles as it relates to, in particular, financial systems modernization at the department. And I've been there since 2007, and I've seen an awful lot of growth. And I've also actually seen an awful lot of opportunities in order to be able to take advantage of some of these ideas such as shared services or some of the other types of disruptive technology that's out there. And I think DHS has done a really good job of really trying to do that. Talk just a second about DHS and why it's been a little bit complicated. As you all know, as we think back on yesterday's events and stuff, the reason why DHS was formed, and like any complicated, very quick crisis-oriented organization or reorganization, there's a lot of things that were done right, but then there were also some things that were kind of put on that we're going to get to later burner. So DHS is a very large, complicated agency. It's the third largest in people. All right, we have over 240,000 people in our agency. It's also about the sixth largest when you look at discretionary funding, and our total authority is over $60 billion. So that just kind of gives you a little bit of backdrop. When we were formed in 2003, we brought together 22 different agencies, and those agencies brought to DHS their legacy cultures, their legacy business processes, and their legacy systems. All right, so we've got an awful lot of them here within DHS. So it was ripe for opportunity to be able to do a lot of consolidation and to ultimately look at things like shared services. But there were also quite a few barriers. In 2003, when we were put together, the nation really was in crisis, and so what the main tenet of DHS was to really focus on mission, not so much to focus on management. So that was barrier number one. Headquarters was never really intended to be a large organization. Much of the policy and systems and authority were really supposed to stay out in the components. Again, not necessarily the best way to be able to have efficiencies and the ability to be able to consolidate where you, hopefully that's not me, but to be able to consolidate. So there were barriers such as that. In addition, money is probably going to be an underwriting theme that you're going to hear today. There was an awful lot of it for DHS at the time, and most of it went towards mission. So we really didn't have much opportunity to be able to look for those efficiencies. And then the other piece of it that I said is headquarters itself was fairly underfunded. But we have lots of opportunities facing DHS since that time, and we've really been making use of trying to do some of those best practices. We've had the ability to actually grow a little bit within the management directorate. Initially, when CFO was started, it was less than 70 people. Now we're a little over 200 people, because we've started to recognize what you actually need in order to be able to run a complex agency like DHS. We've also had a lot of improvements in information technology. So a lot of the technology wasn't there necessarily, and even as recently as a couple years ago, a lot of improvements in security. So we've had a lot of opportunities, or we've had a lot of improvements now, I think, that is ultimately going to allow DHS to kind of take advantage of some of those opportunities. Another huge thing, I think, is DHS has really been able to start to develop its own culture, not just the culture of the agencies that came into us, but our own culture. We've been able to develop our own processes. We've been able to start to develop our own architecture. And ultimately, very, very important is to be able to develop our own governance, all right? So what we've been able to do now is start to look for those opportunities within the department where we can do things differently so that we can focus on mission but still do it in an efficient manner. We've done numerous things. We've taken really advantage of things such as trying to consolidate to a platform and then to be able to offer things as a service. So we've got things such as email. Everyone came in with their own email services. Now we've consolidated down to one, and we offer it as a service. We do things such as SharePoint or business intelligence as a service, so not everybody's out there building their own thing. Take advantage of strategic sourcing as we roll some of these out. DHS is also, we have actually internal shared services. When DHS was put together, we designated one of the components to be an accounting center, so to speak. So they service six agencies, including themselves within the department. And then we have the Coast Guard, which also provides accounting services to 2 other agencies within the department. And then we have other models like that within DHS where we offer procurement, or we actually service 9 different entities within the department. Also, other examples would be with our asset management. So we've been able to do much of that, and I think a lot of the challenges I think that you talked about today, things such as acquisition, things such as funding, how can you continue to focus on mission but still be able to do these things, are all the things that we've really been working through over the last couple years. And so I very much look forward to hearing the conversation here today.
And Peggy and I were actually meeting yesterday, and one of the observations I had out of that meeting is the things that we're grappling with at a government-wide level are still the same things that she's trying to work with at a DHS level, because, again, it's an organization that's a little bit more than a decade old, but it's still a new organization relative to the other ones around government. Next, I'm going to turn it over to David, and he's going to talk a little bit about his experiences. And this one will be a little different, too, because he's coming also from the perspective of a managing partner, not necessarily as a consumer in some of the situation.
Can you hear me? Well, good morning. My name is Dave Vargas, and I am a bean counter. Supposed to say, hey, David, this is an intervention, right? So it's, I'm still wondering, actually, I stopped wondering a couple months ago. Now I understand Bernie Kluger's intention in bringing me over to OPM to lead the HR IT transformation. Bernie and I are partners in crime over at OPM in terms of the HR line of business and the strategic plan for the next 10 years and what we're trying to accomplish. Now, I've been in the federal space for about 22 years, came from the private sector, but I've been in the federal government for about 22. 13 of those in the SES Corps, and usually everything that I've been involved in has been part of a trouble operation. So I'm a kind of a troubleshooter. I can count things. So It's a very interesting skill that people apparently value. So I've had that experience throughout many areas of internal to the United States Department of Housing where I came from. One of the things that HUD did back in the late 1990s under Secretary Cuomo was the consolidation of back office operations into centers. Does that sound familiar? You know, and it was a cost saving. A couple things happened. There was a lot of intense cost savings as a result, number one. And number two is concentration of expertise in a particular area that people could tap. And you know, I became a kind of a fan of the model of shared services. Working in the program area, which is where most of my experience was, I was on the receiving end of services, whether it was financial services, human resources, et cetera. And my first eye-opening experience with HR was when I actually left HUD, came to OPM, and I carry with me some very interesting information. I have about 12 user IDs and about 12 passwords to different systems. So coming to HRLOB it's been kind of twofold experience. On the one hand is I've actually get to run something that's successful, something that's working well. Over $1 billion in savings to date, targeted at $1.6 billion in savings, cost savings and cost avoidance through 2015. Well, being the accountant that I am, my question is, okay, so what are you gonna do for me for the next 10 years? So we're looking for the next $1 billion, $2 billion. Heck, why don't we make it 10? Of saving taxpayer money in terms of bringing operations to share services. Some of the things that we looked in the past, we looked at cost being an important component. We looked at service, and that's something that is really critical. And to all my partners in the share service centers, this is something that you've heard me say in the HR LOB is, customer service is absolutely critical to our success as a shared service center, as a line of business, number one. Number two is our impact on human resource policy, right? So IT systems don't lead policies the other way around. It's the policy leads and then the systems follow. So it's a very important concept. And the last thing, and one of the biggest priorities for me, and this is something that we have to work very closely with the partners at OMB, is we have to make absolutely certain as providers that that technology that is required to meet human capital policy can be sustained. So a lot of our systems they're good systems, they do the job, you get paid, the eagle lands, as my former boss used to say, every 2 weeks on your bank account, right? But what about the next 10 years? What about social media? What about your iPhones and things of that nature? People want information, they want it yesterday, not now, they want it yesterday. They need information to make business decisions. And it's our job to collect that information. It's our job to make sure that that information is timely and it is accurate, and that provides a service to the programs. And the programs, I never lose sight of the fact that it is our program offices, our different agencies that kind of, they pay our bills in terms of the HRLOB. And I don't lose sight of that fact. So we are a very mature line of business. We have a steering group. We call them our MACE, which is our multi-agencies steering committee, and it's a good governance process. They approve the work streams of our project management office. Each one of them contributes towards paying for that service, and it has worked extremely well. They have a lot of say and a lot of input into what it is that we're looking for and in terms of oversight, in terms of governance, in terms of benchmarking. We have some very interesting benchmark reports, which I welcome all of you to take a look at. On a biannual basis, we look at some key components. Cost per unit. We are now looking at independent levels of customer satisfaction. I think that's a critical component of outcomes from SSEs. So I come from that perspective. I look forward to working with all of you over the next 10 years because what we've done to date over the past, since 2003, the past 10 years, it's fantastic, but I'm hoping that the next 10 years will be even better. So with that, thank you.
Great, thanks, David. So next we have Ann Rung from GSA. So Ann's got, one thing we have to remember with shared services, it's not always about technology all the time. GSA is a big provider of shared services just from the acquisition business line itself, but Ann also brings a perspective from state government. And a couple months ago, I sat on a panel with state and local representatives. They're actually doing a lot of quite innovative things in that market. So I think Ann's going to bring a lot of different perspectives to us. Why don't you share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks. So I am head of government-wide policy at GSA. I'm also the chief acquisition officer at GSA. Before GSA, I worked at Commerce. My old boss, Scott Quayle's in the front row. I worked with Simone here, so it's great to see everyone again. I do bring both a federal and a state perspective. So at GSA, I joined Dan Tangerlini, our administrator's team, about a year ago. And he and others have been working hard to remind people the important role GSA can play in driving efficiencies across government. We think we can best do that by returning to the core mission of GSA, which is to deliver the best value in acquisition, real estate, and technology services to government and the American people. And we are in a very unique position to leverage the full scale of government in the acquisition and real estate and some of the technology areas. And through collaboration and cooperation with the agencies and leveraging that full scale and doing it once and doing it well, we can certainly focus on doing more with less and delivering more and better outcomes. I also bring the state perspective. I worked at the state equivalent of GSA in the state of Pennsylvania as Deputy Secretary of Procurement. Under Governor Rendell, we centralized all the procurement operations within our agency, created a shared services center modeled after the private sector, and we're able to undertake strategic sourcing on a fairly large scale in a short amount of time. So I bring both the state and the federal perspective to this.
Great.
Thanks.
Simone, so satellites and census, tell us about shared services at Commerce and what that means to you.
Yeah, so satellites and census is actually a good lead-in into just describing what the Department of Commerce is like. For those of you who don't know, the Department of Commerce is composed of about a dozen different bureaus. Most of them have their own CIOs. They all have their own IT budgets. And there's a lot of diversity in the mission programs across Commerce, ranging from satellites, weather prediction at NOAA, to the census. We have Patent and Trademark Office. We have international trade. We have NIST that does research, standards, and technology development. And so because of the diversity in the mission areas and the decentralized, federated nature of the department, there's a long history of very distributed decision-making when it comes to IT spending. For those of you who haven't heard me speak before, I'll mention, some of you may already know if you have heard me speak before. At the department, I control about 1.5% of the department's IT spending, and the other 98.5% is controlled by the bureaus. And even within the bureaus, not all of the spending is necessarily under the control of the CIOs, because we have very large, important mission programs. And so very often the funding is further distributed within bureaus out to line offices or large programs. And the result of this is just a legacy of very independently managed distributed services. And so we viewed the framework for IT management and IT investment management at Commerce as really being ripe for moving more towards shared services models. At Commerce, we perceived, as we were going into this belt-tightening fiscal environment over the past couple of years, a need to really strengthen the ability of IT decision makers to better manage IT portfolios. And so our acting secretary in June of last year issued an IT portfolio management policy that strengthened the role of the department CIO, provided more capability for setting standards and architecture, implementing shared services, reviewing investments. And then I, as the department CIO, further delegated some of those authorities down to bureau CIOs so that they could be better able to manage their portfolios within the bureaus. The reason IT was such an opportunity is not just because we were distributed, but also we are not the largest agency, or not even among the largest agencies for IT spending. But we are, I think, among the heaviest in terms of percentage of our budget that we spend on IT. And so as we were looking across the department for how we can save money and help manage budget controls and budget reductions, IT was clearly one of the areas where we needed to be looking. So in the shared services area, we've been looking at a variety of different types of opportunities. Within the bureaus, I mentioned there's been a lot of distributed services, and so within the bureaus, there's been some efforts into moving towards consolidated services. Joe Klimowitz, whose name you've already heard earlier today, at NOAA has been moving from a set of stovepipe services for commodity IT functions such as data storage, data archiving, data dissemination, and transport, and moving towards from these stovepipe services to enterprise services. We heard at DHS some as-a-service offerings, and we've also seen things like that within the Census Bureau. There had previously been a large number of database management services and SharePoint services, and those have been now consolidated into enterprise services within the Census Bureau. So within bureaus, there's been a lot of effort to pull things up to the CIO level, at least in the areas that are commoditized, and start pulling together distributed services into shared services, in part for efficiency purposes, but also in part just to improve the quality of many of these services. We've also looked at shared services as an opportunity from a sort of a geographic perspective. I work in the Commerce headquarters building downtown. When I started at Commerce, we had 7 CIOs in that building. We had 7 different, maybe 6 help desks, 6 or 7 organizations that were all running different email infrastructures to support emails for their organizations. And I think most of you would agree that if you were to sort of design a building, you probably wouldn't put 7 CIOs in it and 6 help desks in it. Even if there are different organizations with different missions, you would think that some of the commoditized types of IT functions could be consolidated into more efficient centralized services. And that's the direction that we're moving in the headquarters building in some areas. And so we're looking at things like help desk consolidation, moving email to the cloud, and web hosting and web content management to the cloud. And there's, we're finding as we do these types of things that there is demand for it. I got an email a couple of weeks ago from one of the, not the department level CFO, but a sub-organization CFO, who sent me an email saying, hey, our email went down last night and nobody knew about it, nobody was able to do anything about it because we don't run 24/7 services. Does your office run 24/7 support services? And I responded saying, no, my organization doesn't either. And there are half dozen organizations that don't have enough critical mass to provide 24/7 services. But one of the things that we hope to accomplish through the help desk consolidation that we're looking at in the headquarters building is not just cost savings, but improving the effectiveness and the quality of services. So if we take a half dozen help desks and consolidate them into one, in addition to saving money, by pooling those resources and distributing them differently, we may be able to provide 24/7 services and better technical support for our customers. And then the last area that we're looking at in the shared services arena is really not just looking at point services such as security continuous monitoring or email or help desk, but looking at migrating fully to cross-servicing models so that we have, I mentioned when I started at Commerce, we had 7 CIOs in the headquarters building. Now we have 6, and a year from now we may have, actually I'm hoping that we will have 5. And maybe a year after that down to 4. And the way we're accomplishing this is we actually have some of the smallest organizations in the building that are moving towards a model where they will be fully cross-serviced by a different IT service provider and essentially getting out of the IT business. So the Minority Business and Development Agency at Commerce, prior to last October 1st, had their own CIO, their own IT services, and their own IT infrastructure, and now they don't have any of those things. So they've fully moved over to a service model where they're receiving end-to-end IT services. They are happy with the quality of services that they're getting, and we have documented cost savings from doing that. We're in the process, as I just mentioned, of making a similar migration for one of the other smaller bureaus. And really the issue is not just one of cost savings, it really is one of improving the quality of the services and the effectiveness with which we're supporting the mission at Commerce. So those are some of the different types of things that we have going on.
Great, thank you. So as I said earlier, what I'm going to try and do is group some questions in for these folks in terms of the topics that are going to happen in the concurrent sessions afterwards. Just so you know, to make it kind of fun, I typed up a long list of questions that I sent everyone, but they don't know which one I'm going to pick. So that could be the kind of surprise part. But what I want to start talking about first is really shared services and is it worth it, or what's the driver here? So I'm kind of looking at Peggy and Simone to kind of talk us a little bit about what you think shared services, how you think shared services will change the way you meet the mission needs of your organization.
I'm going to go first?
Yeah.
So it's all about the money. Being a numbers guy too here, and really it's just a great opportunity. Now's the time to be able to do it. So that the shared service providers who want to be sellers, who want to be the best in class, they want to be able to provide the best value and to minimize risk for their customers. That's really what we'd like to be able to look for. Homeland Security was not put in business to worry about providing procurement services or HR services or accounting services. We've got very complex, very critical missions that we need to focus on. And what I'd like to be able to do is to be able to allow us to be able to focus on those missions and not to be in a position of always competing for mission dollars to be able to do some of the back office stuff that we need to do. So one of the things that we see typically happens, and so as a result, this is what I'd be looking for in a shared service provider, is to be able to make sure that you've got the ability to innovate. You have to be able to upgrade when you need to upgrade, pull in government-wide standards, when they're in there, and so you do it once, and then to be able to plan and manage growth such that your customers can have predictable, transparent pricing. And so to me, really, it's the idea of going from a capital expenditure into an operating expense that then, if it's a standard business process that I don't need to do, being the Department of Homeland Security, I ought to be able to go out there and purchase that. That also should, in theory, give me better internal controls, all right? Standardized business processes should allow me to have better internal controls. It should also give me better ability to do analytics, because what it'll do is it'll give me standard data, and it'll include data in there such as what OMB is looking for as a requirement that comes out and says you have to pay people with small businesses within 15 days. It's the ability for me to be able to do that once and not to do that in each of my different infrastructures. And then ultimately to actually be able to do my job, and all the other lines of business's job is to actually analyze data, to be able to provide recommendations either to DHS leadership or to be able to be responsive to other risks maybe that are occurring in the department.
Simone, how do you think it's going to change the way you meet mission needs?
Well, I agree wholeheartedly with everything that you just heard, but I'll add a little bit to it. I agree that clearly it's significantly about money, but I also think it's about the effectiveness and the ability of IT to support the mission. At NOAA, I mentioned NOAA, there were a large number of IT decision makers. And so there's somebody who's responsible for the IT for the satellite service. There's somebody who's responsible for the IT for the National Weather Service, which is responsible for weather prediction and climate modeling. If I were the undersecretary or the administrator at NOAA, I wouldn't want those people to worry about email and help desks and running the BlackBerries. I would want those people to be focused on the mission delivery. And so that's one of the things that by aggregating services and developing enterprise-level shared services, you have somebody who's responsible for providing these commoditized IT functions, and that allows the other decision makers to better focus their efforts on the IT that directly supports the mission. And then there are other aspects of effectiveness. We've seen a variety of areas at Commerce where we've had some security weaknesses that have needed to be improved. And in some cases, those have been in the smaller organizations where there isn't necessarily the critical mass in staffing and skill sets or in funding to secure systems as well as we would like. And so by aggregating systems and consolidating them, we're better able to secure them. We've seen that also with our financial systems. Right now, the Department of Commerce runs 5 different instances of our financial systems, and we're moving towards doing a consolidation as part of our financial systems modernization that will lead to a single system for the department. And we expect that that'll have a significant impact on security of those systems, because it'll be easier and more cost-effective to manage security around one system than around almost a half dozen. And then the other area is really being able to provide better information on the quality of services that people are getting so that you can manage the quality of services better. I mentioned we were looking at doing a help desk consolidation, and we had some reluctance of some of the players to get on board. It's not surprising maybe to some of you that occasionally the government is a little change averse. And so as we heard concerns, well, we don't know if you're going to be able to provide us the quality of service that we can provide ourselves. And so we would go back to them and say, okay, well, what quality of services are you providing yourselves? And frequently they couldn't answer that question. So they had these gut knee-jerk concerns, but they didn't necessarily have the level of maturity in IT service management to be able to say, here's exactly how many tickets our help desk deals with in an average month, and exactly the service levels that we have in terms of initial response time and closure time for these tickets. And so one of the things that we can present to them as additional benefits besides cost savings is better information on the quality of the services that they're getting, and then a commitment to manage that quality based on metrics to improve those services.
David?
Let me add a couple of things from terms of a somewhat mature line of business. Is as you provide, as our SSCs provide payroll and human resource capabilities at the shared service centers, what now agencies are looking for are suites of services. So now, they don't want to be entering things 3, 4, 5 different times as it relates to personnel. They want a single point of entry. So that's a critical component of what agencies are looking for. For the SSCs, in talking to them, what they're asking for in terms of how they communicate with, say, OPM, OMB, and other agencies is they're looking for standardization of data elements. They're looking for interoperability. Actually, we're looking also for interoperability among systems. So those are some of the key functions is once you get past the initial setup of these lines of business is you got to keep improving the service delivery to agencies.
Let me ask a question. Peggy, kind of weigh in on this one. What do you see as the difference between providing email services and basically, if FEMA's going out in the field, if there's a disaster and they have to pay people and collect money and do other things? Does that worry you when you start talking about shared services?
It does, because it's where you get into customization and stuff and how unique we are. And it's interesting because one of the shared services that most agencies go to is the travel system. And we're in the process of moving to our new travel system from GSA into the new contract. And what you do find is sometimes you really are different. Do you know what I mean? And so one of the very interesting things when you take a look at travel, typically you think of the travel voucher as a travel voucher, you just do it all the same way. But then when all of a sudden you have a whole bunch of people who are not really part of the agency that have to go out there and respond, or either that we're responding with other agencies and doing travel with them, and then all of a sudden you're having 200 people traveling on a travel authorization. That's really not normal. That's not typical. You know what I mean? So it does, I think, and it worries me in 2 ways. To be able to have the ability to be able to understand what's different and what's not different. So that's a change management issue. Exactly, the change aversion is out there. Really, so it's a governance issue. You have to have that strong leadership to be able to say, no, this is really different and this is really, really unique. And then to be able to have the shared service providers to be able to, for instance with FEMA, to surge up when you need them to, which I think is actually could be a benefit of shared services if it's done right and they understand the uniqueness or the unique requirements of their customers. You have the ability to be able to manage that risk a little bit. But you really do need to understand the customer and understand the things that are in fact standard and those things that are different.
And Simone, I guess from your perspective as a CIO, again, email shared services versus a new financial system or an acquisition system, what are the things that you're planning for in those different situations?
Well, so I'm a strong believer that the right answer is not to consolidate 100% of IT up to the department level, particularly in an organization such as Commerce where there is so much mission diversity. I do think that it's natural and appropriate for the mission-related IT to remain close to where the mission is down in the bureau level. But there are areas where we have commodity types of IT services, email, help desk, web hosting, those sorts of things, and business and administrative functions, including HR and financial systems. And so I think it's not too difficult to draw some lines on where things should be consolidated upward, either at higher level organizations or even at the department-wide level, versus what should remain down close to the mission to be able to assure the mission delivery.
What I want to turn to now is talk a little bit about kind of becoming or being a shared service provider. I think Ann and David have kind of experience in this area. And I guess, David, I'll start with you, and Ann, I'll offer you the same question to look at as well. But do you have anything or a sense of what are the characteristics of good providers? Like when we get a lot of calls in our office complaining about things, so I know sometimes what are the things about what may be a less desirable provider, but what are the good things that you're hearing that make you kind of light up?
There are several things that we look for in terms of a provider. Number one is the focus of the organization in terms of the services that are going to be provided. And I'm looking at, throughout federal government, so I'm not speaking necessarily about one agency and then cylinders within that agency, but I think it still applies. When we're looking at shared service providers, we want to see how important it is this as a overall business of that organization to provide services to the federal government. So when you look at the corporate view, it's not necessarily an agency corporate view, but a federal corporate view. The service that they bring into the table, the interoperability of the tools that they're going to use. You never have a 100% solution tool to everybody's problems. And I think that's a very key point that's been made by this panel is you don't get, very, very seldom do you get to a 100% solution. Even in payroll, you would think that you have 100%, and you really do not. Ask State Department how different it is to deal with payroll from folks that live outside of the United States. So that's really important. Funding and the commitment to that particular, I'm going to call it a center of excellence or a shared service, is the ability of this shared service center in the future to be able to maintain their systems, right? To be able to upgrade their infrastructure and their systems. Very important is what plans do they have in terms of customer service and managing customers' expectations. Call centers are great, but if you don't monitor the quality of those call centers, if you don't look at how long it's taken for calls to be answered or for problems to be resolved, then you're going to have a problem. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, interoperability and data exchange of the solutions that they provide.
Great.
At GSA, we've been meeting with all the agency leadership to really make the case that they should be using GSA services in the acquisition arena and fleet and travel. I'll just speak to the acquisition arena for a minute. I mean, we've been laying out the vision of GSA as the government centralized buyer. And our goal is to reduce the number of procurement shops across the government and reduce administrative costs. And the only way we're really going to compel agencies or make that argument is by showing them that we can reduce time and we can save them money. If we can't make that case, we're not going to be successful in this arena. We've set a goal to increase our market share from 12% today in the acquisition arena to 17% by the end of this year. So the approach there is we have aggressive growth goals, but we have to do that through contract excellence. It's that simple.
So to quote my favorite diva, Adele, so rumor has it that GSA is considering the possibility of leaving some business lines, potentially in like the HR arena. Can you talk to a little bit about that in terms of, what do I need to know about being this, and what are the things that you're learning that are saying maybe this isn't the right business for me?
It was fairly straightforward. We're building a strategy at GSA around our core competencies. So those are acquisition, real estate, and some of the technology services. Human resources is not our core competency. So it is our intent to move that service out to another organization that has the expertise and experience in that area. Similarly, we would argue that some of the other agencies in the acquisition arena might consider using GSA since our core competency in that arena.
And let me add, just kind of going the other way, the procurement is kind of a target-rich environment in the federal government. And I see this quite a bit in the HR line of business. We have, multiple licensing agreements among multiple federal agencies for the same tools. So we're not leveraging the buying power of the federal government. This is something that we need to, we as corporate United States government need to work on and bring that to bear. So that's one of the things that, in terms of delivery, service delivery, some of the opportunities that we're going to be looking at will be in the acquisition of tools, and this is where we're looking for GSA's leadership to assist us in that.
And GSA has shown it can be successful when it does leverage the full scale of the government in the acquisition arena, through strategic sourcing with wireless and with office supplies and domestic delivery. We've realized hundreds of millions of dollars in savings, but that's only by leveraging the full scale of the government.
It's kind of summing up some of what David was saying too. It's kind of saying if you're looking to get into the shared service business, really think hard about it, because if it's not part of really what's driving you as an organization, it might not be the right business for you to be in. Is that kind of fair to say?
I would definitely say so, absolutely.
Agreed.
Peggy, you kind of run the gamut. You are a provider within the organization, you are a customer, or you have customers. Do you have any sense of what makes a good provider, and how about what makes a good customer?
So to be a good provider, you absolutely have to want to be a provider. You have to want to do it. Because if not, you're not going to give the best services. And I think basically saying whether or not it's email and being able to do help desk, or whether or not it's providing HR services, if you're good at doing it and you really want to do it, you then need to build the business model that's going to be sustainable. All right, so that's really, to me, I think the key is to ensure that you're capitalizing when you need to capitalize, that you've got the right contracts in place to be able to make sure that you can be responsive to your customers, especially an entity that has a lot of surge or emergency type practices or whatever. So to me, that's really what we're looking for. I think as a good shared service provider, you really want predictability. You don't want to have surprises. You want to be able to budget when you need to budget. All right, so a couple years in advance, a price increase would be really nice to know about. And you want to be able to make sure that your provider, a good shared service provider, would be managing growth and risk by actually trying to get some steady, predictable pricing. All right, so that's kind of some of the stuff that we would be looking for. As a customer, I think it's critical to have strong executive sponsorship. I think that it's not easy to be able to move all of your practices into shared services, especially when you're trying to do mission, because you're always going to have people saying, I don't understand why you're doing that. I know this system here that I've got. Why are you disrupting me? Why do I have to do this? And so to have strong executive sponsorship, both at the political and the career level, I think is absolutely critical. I think that you have to know your business. You have to know what are those unique differences, such as the ability to surge on Hurricane Sandy versus things that are just kind of normal. And we play at the headquarters role. We play a very strong role on that, working with our customer components to be able to say you're unique in these two areas, but you're not unique someplace else. So you really have to know your business. I think you have to be willing to change. You have to be willing to change, and I think that goes back to the leadership thing. You have to be told that you're willing to change, and you have to then enforce the ability to enforce the requirement that you change where you need to. And then you have to do your part in the transition. You have to make sure that you know your data, that you clean up your data. You have to know what's in your service level agreement, because oftentimes, the help desk, Simone talked about the help desk, I'm going to sit there and I'm going to complain if they don't answer me within 5 rings and they don't fix my help ticket within 3 hours or whatever. But if I look at my MOU or my SLA, guess what? They've got 24 hours or whatever it is. So, and not forcing your provider to give you more than what you've agreed you're going to pay to. Otherwise, you're going to pay more for it. So those are the things I think that make good customers.
I would also argue what makes a good shared services provider is being able to see around the curve.
Yes.
So if you're stuck in the processes and the products and services of today,
right,
you are not going to serve your customers. The acquisition arena is rapidly changing. If we're still selling typewriters, we are not serving our customers.
Agree.
Simone, I want to turn a little bit to the concept of collaboration. You have your former CFO sitting up in the front. How do you work with your C-suite organization in terms of talking about shared services and delivering the solutions that you have to from an IT standpoint?
So there's a lot of collaboration at Commerce with the C-suite, with CIOs across Commerce through our Commerce CIO Council, with senior both politicals and career people across the department leadership through the department's executive management team and department management council, a huge amount of collaboration. And you know, I want to echo what you just heard about executive sponsorship. If there isn't buy-in at those senior levels, things are not going to happen. And I like to think that we've made some valuable contributions and some significant accomplishments over the past year and a half, but none of those successes are things that I can solely take credit for, because there's been a huge amount of support from Scott when he was the CFO, our current CFO, our previous Deputy Secretary and Acting Secretary, our current Acting Deputy Secretary, and our new Secretary. So, you know, you need that level of support for change when you're trying to take what is really a large organization and not tweak things. You know, the idea is not to squeeze out cost savings of 0.5% or 1%, but to really change the tide in how IT is being managed, how our investment portfolios are structured and how we're dealing with them, how we're providing services, and then as a corollary to that, how we're supporting the mission. So there is a huge amount of collaboration, a huge amount of discussion, and I think it all begins there. There isn't anything that happens without that top-level support.
Who owns it within your organization, shared services? Is it you? Like, so when they have that accountable person and something's not working, is it Simone that they're calling up on the phone, or?
It's, well, so I prefer it not be me that they call. Because typically if they call me, I ask them if they've actually called the help desk, and sometimes they haven't. But the more general question of who's responsible, you know, it depends, because I described earlier that we, even in the context of shared services, we're still decentralized. We have a lot of shared services that are being offered within bureaus that I don't have any direct management control or authority for. But for the things that are happening at the headquarters level, and those include the organizational cross-servicing frameworks that I talked about earlier, and also some of the implementation of department-wide shared services, which is another new thing for the Department of Commerce. Until this year, the Department of Commerce had no department-wide operational IT shared services, and this year we're starting to implement security continuous monitoring as a service across the entire department. So for the things that are run out of my organization, either because they're these cross-servicing models or department-wide functions, then ultimately I'm responsible, but that responsibility gets delegated downward, and I'm pleased to have a strong team of people working under me who can manage these services. And you know, really what we're talking about now is, because it's new enough, it's more than just managing services. These are really transformational initiatives for the Department of Commerce, and that's what we're managing. And managing change is always harder than managing budgets or managing IT.
So I'm going to ask and answer a question. I'm going to be Peggy in this minute. So I was going to say about collaboration, how it goes on at the Department of Homeland Security, but there's actually never been a meeting that I've had with Peggy that I haven't had a lawyer, an acquisition specialist, a CFO, a CIO, and a CAO, and
Collaboration.
Chico in a room with me. So that kind of answers that question. Let's talk about buying or purchasing real quick. So Ann, I'll look at you a little bit.
Yeah.
I've sometimes told a story, made an analogy that when we started doing shared services and financial management, we started buying it the same way we used to buy computer systems, and you can't buy shared services the same way. What are things that we need to do, or are we in a good place or a good position to buy shared services with the tools that we have today from the acquisition world?
So agencies need to buy through GSA. We are the government's buyer. And you will reduce the duplication tremendously and save administrative costs, time and money. You know, we recognize we need to fundamentally change our processes and the way we've done business for a lot of years. You know, Dan Tangerlini came to GSA as a former customer. I was a former customer a year ago, and our head of the Federal Acquisition Service, Tom Sharp, was a customer of GSA's when he was at Treasury. So I think part of the appeal in recruiting Tom was he did bring that customer perspective. And so we recognize that at GSA we do need to change some of these processes and change, kind of make ourselves easy to use and ensure that we're always having competitive pricing. But we really do truly believe that the best path for the agencies to drive efficiencies and savings is by reducing duplication and using the GSA contracts.
David, you have the HR line of business set up such that you have public providers and private providers. Are there different things that you've learned or different tools that are in place for an agency to go one direction or another? And are there things that we need to change from your lessons learned out of that?
Yes, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, the decision as to which way you go is really a decision for the agency. We work very closely with the Office of Management and Budget as their senior partner on the HRLOB in approving business cases. So what we'd like to see is we want to make sure that there is competition, that there's been a concerted effort by the agency to analyze not just the cost of the transactions, but the services that are being provided, how they currently availing themselves of those services. So there's a business case that has to come to us. We review that business case. They have the ability to go, with public service providers or private service providers. We have one agency, a very large agency right now, who, after looking internally to federal agencies for their HR services, decided that for what they needed, and they would be better served by a private service provider, and they made a very good business case for doing so. So it's agencies got to know what they want and then make the case one way or the other as to how to go. But the important part here is you will save money by going to a shared service provider. You just got to be very diligent in your business case.
And did you want to add something? No.
Pretty good.
I guess for Simone and Peggy, are there things that you're kind of looking at as far as acquisition tools that you feel you don't have right now? Or are there tools that you think will work well for you when you go and venture out into this acquisition world?
Well, I would just say David said it very well. I mean, I think that's exactly the way that you stated it is exactly the way that the department is looking at it. Now, so are you talking, so was that the question? Or did you have another question?
No, I forgot.
Acquisition tools.
Acquisition tools.
So from a standpoint of how do you go about acquiring it, exactly what David said. I think from a standpoint of what we are looking for, if maybe I'll change your answer into a procurement question. As far as what procurement tools are we looking for, absolutely looking for integration. And I think one of the things that we're finding at this particular point is maybe not all the federal shared service providers as it relates to financial systems necessarily offers the 100% right suite. So trying to figure out what is that right suite for various agencies, I think is going to be really critical.
Simone.
So I mentioned our financial systems modernization, and in addition to consolidating our core financials, it's also going to bring in acquisition tools, budgeting tools, and so from that perspective, that's going to be a valuable thing. But I'd rather put sort of quotes around the word tools, because I think what's going to bring us the most value in terms of a tool, something that helps us make better decisions, is not a technological tool for acquisitions or procurement, but really it's better information. And the financial systems consolidation will provide us better information in significant ways. Part of what we struggle with right now is the lack of very clear baselines. It's hard when you have this distributed environment to know exactly what you're spending on what, where it's being spent, how it's being spent. And so if you really want to improve your acquisitions, you really need good baseline information. You need transparency and an understanding of your current spend in order to identify the real opportunities for improvement. So I think really the best tool is knowledge, and that's one of the areas where we're trying to strengthen our ability to make better decisions.
Great. We only have a couple minutes left, but I did want to provide the opportunity if the audience had a question or two that they wanted to raise to the panelists. I think we had a hand here, and there's a hand or two over to the left.
Sorry, I think I heard you say that Commerce was planning a consolidation of financial reporting. How are you making the decision, what business case, to do that internally or go to existing provider?
So we've been working on a business case for financial systems modernization for several years now. Ultimately, in the end, the decision was taken out of our hands. So we had a variety of paths that we were evaluating, but some people in the room may know that last year or earlier this year, OMB issued a memorandum directing all agencies that were doing financial systems modernization to use existing line of business service providers. And so that essentially we are planning on moving to an existing shared service provider for our financial systems.
Let me just add, is in addition to the guidance that came out from the Office of Management and Budget in, I think it's May 2012, the CIO Council in April of 2013 issued a guide to, to these shared service providers components. That's something you should take a look at. It's April 2013 from CIO Council.
So we have a question right here from Mike.
So the description across the panel is that there's a variety of types of opportunities. The commodity, sort of the business administrative, and then the mission functions. And you've also described different levels, at the bureau level, at the agency level, and sort of government-wide. I'm kind of interested in the panel's perspective on where do you really see the sweet spot of opportunities? How hard is it to do? The further up it gets, more complex and risky. But what's your perspective on intra versus interagency opportunities in the future?
That's a tough one.
Don't all start at
All right,
once.
so I mean, I think that's a really good question. I think that the sweet spot probably varies across organizations because it depends on what your current environment and your current baselines look like. But I think, in general, I think it's probably safe to say that the more commoditized something is, the easier it is to pull upward. So there may be enough variety for some of the needs associated with storage that you want to potentially keep it at a lower level, whereas something like email, I think it would probably be hard for GSA to argue that their email needs are fundamentally different from Commerce's email needs. And so as something is more commoditized and more common across organizations, it's easier to pull upward. I think also part of the issue is just these trend lines and moving up these maturity curves. So I think we're going to see more and more things moving up from bureau to agency, agency to government-wide. There are not that many government-wide shared services being provided at the moment, but I think that that's going to increase. And I think one of the things that accelerates that is some of the new information technology infrastructure and service delivery models that are out there, principally things like virtualization and cloud, and those are making it easier for services to be offered broadly across organizations, and they're also making it easier to establish services without some of the massive capital investments because, as we heard earlier, it provides a model where you're shifting capital investment to operational investment.
So that's really the key point, and part of the reason why I hesitated is because I think what I would say the sweet spot is today in this budget environment is probably going to be very different than it will be maybe in 5 years or whatever. So I think sometimes agencies have to make decisions based on the amount of money that they have at the moment, and the ability to be able to have an investment funding pool, so to speak. One of the things that the department tries to do is we are trying to look forward. We're trying to take a look at where will we be able to save money in the next two budget cycles, but you need to sometimes invest some of that money now. So sometimes the people who are providing the services are the ones that have the availability, they've got the infrastructure and they can do that. Maybe that is at a bureau or a component level today, but that doesn't necessarily mean, and the commodities are much easier, I think, to be able to do at that higher level, but maybe the sweet spot really is who has that current infrastructure. So again, that's very much on DHS's mind, and we are trying to build that into the budget formulation process so that we actually build our own internal business cases to be able to say, what are those opportunities? Is it internal, is it external, who's the best provider, and is there a way to be able to harvest a little bit of funding from the departmental level? Again, leadership saying yes or no, and clearly OMB and the Hill, to be able to say, how will we make this investment such that we can go ahead and save money and be more efficient in the future?
So one of the things I would say is definitely a target-rich environment within agencies and throughout federal government. If you were to put this in a quadrant and you have risk going one way and costs going the other, you want to get those things that are low cost, low risk, actually impact, high impact, low cost. Those are the things that you want to try to address. And
right.
There is an initial cost for every transformation, every move. There's a cost involved with that. It pays off in the long term. But you have to take a look at what your budget is, and this is where working with your CFO, your CIO, your CIO is kind of critical in making these decisions as a corporate entity as to what's best for your agency.
And in the acquisition arena, we've had success government-wide in the highly commoditized areas like office supplies and domestic delivery, and that has shown it's a sweet spot. But the real opportunity and the real money is in the services area, and it'd be nice to, we believe that there are some areas that we can begin to tackle in that arena.
So we are at the hour point, I think. I want to give a big round of applause for our panelists, Peggy, David, Ann, and Simone.